A 500-pound lion, Samson, stood on his hind legs, his amber eyes fixed on a steel table. On that table were two newborn husky puppies, Hope and Liberty, fighting their first blizzard. Jim Sterling, a man who thought he knew the rules of the wild, had just made the terrifying choice to open the door. He had 7 years of failure weighing on him, and now he was trusting a beast, rescued from a roadside zoo, with 2 tiny lives. But what Jim saw through the glass that night broke every single rule he thought he knew. Jim, an ex-forest ranger who ran this remote Montana sanctuary with his wife, Martha, couldn't stop shaking. The voice on the phone hours earlier, Dr. Vance's, had been desperate. A pregnant sled dog hit by a snowmobile. Martha, a retired ER nurse, had performed an emergency C-section in the back of the clinic during the blizzard. 2 puppies survived, but their tiny bodies were shutting down. Now they were in the annex, the sterile medical bay Jim had built. And on the other side of the reinforced glass, Samson, the magnificent creature Jim had saved, was calling. Not roaring, but a deep, distressed sound Jim recognized from the lion's own darkest hours. Jim looked at Martha, who was performing chest compressions on the smallest puppy, Hope. He looked at the window, where Samson's massive face was plastered against the glass, his nostrils flaring. The decision Jim made next broke every safety protocol for exotic animals in the United States. He knew the risk. Don't go anywhere. Jim walked to the heavy steel barrier. He reached for the locking mechanism. Every survival instinct screamed no. This lion and apex predator should see those puppies as prey, as an annoyance, or simply as food. But Jim saw something else in those eyes. Need. The heavy door swung inward, with a low hiss of cold air mixing with the warmth. Samson stepped into the room. He didn't rush. He didn't growl. His enormous paws were placed deliberately on the tiled floor. He walked straight to the table. Martha froze, her body instinctively shielding the puppies. Samson lowered his mighty head, that blunt instrument capable of crushing bone, and gently, with a carefulness that defied his nature, he sniffed the whimpering creatures. Samson simply lay down, curling his body around the table like an amber shield. The danger was gone, but the immediate threat to the puppies' lives remained. For the next 48 hours, the annex became a neonatal intensive care unit run by Martha. She worked tirelessly, feeding the puppies every 2 hours, monitoring the incubator, and fighting the losing battle against Liberty's fading health. Liberty, the larger male, was losing weight. His breathing was shallow. Samson had not moved. He ate his raw meat meals from the floor, his eyes never leaving the little family on the table. Then the crisis hit. Liberty suddenly went rigid. He started to seize violently, a terrible, tiny spasm of a body giving up. Martha was frantic. She grabbed the oxygen mask, but the seizure was too fast. Just as the puppy's seizure peaked, the silent lion did something that defied science and saved Liberty's life in a shocking, sudden twist. Samson had been quietly watching, but as Liberty seized, the lion's whole body tensed. He rose up slightly and slammed his massive front paw onto the floor with a calculated, muffled thud. The shock wave of the impact briefly disrupted the air. Liberty's seizure stopped instantly, replaced by exhausted whimpers. Then the sound began. It wasn't a roar of dominance. It was a sound Jim had only heard a few times, the purr rumble. Lions don't purr like house cats, but this deep, continuous vibration resonated through the floor, through the steel table, and through the very air. Jim could feel it in his chest, a low-frequency hum that bypassed the ears and spoke directly to the core. Liberty responded. The puppy, whose paw had been limp, began the instinctive kneading motion against Samson's muzzle. He settled into the warmth, his tiny body rising and falling with the massive, rhythmic breaths of the lion. Dr. Webb, the veterinarian, was speechless. He later theorized the low-frequency vibrations, similar to therapies for bone density, had stimulated life back into the dying puppy. Hope was real. Just as they celebrated, A thick official envelope arrived from the Federal Wildlife Service. The real battle, the man-made one, was about to begin. The letter confirmed Jim's worst fears. Clayton Mercer, the wealthy neighbor who resented Jim's sanctuary, had filed a complaint directly with the FWS, alleging reckless endangerment of domestic animals and improper housing of a regulated exotic species. The FWS was sending an agent for an immediate assessment. If they found the lion in direct contact with the dogs, Jim would lose everything, and Samson would be taken away, likely euthanized. The day of the inspection, the tension in the frigid Montana air was palpable. Agent Sarah Vance arrived. She was sharp, professional, and wore the uniform of authority like a shield. Unbeknownst to Jim, Agent Vance had her own history. She had once failed to prevent a tragedy involving a captive lion, and she was here to ensure her failure was never repeated by allowing exceptions. "Mr. Sterling," she said, her voice firm, "I have an emergency order here to tranquilize and remove the lion. This is not a request." Jim felt the blood drain from his face. He pleaded, explaining the miracle, the healing purr, and the deep, inexplicable bond. Vance listened, but her mind was made up. "I see a dangerous predator and two fragile domestic dogs. My job is to enforce the law, not believe in fairy tales. Prepare the dart." The young FWS officer raised the tranquilizer gun, aiming for Samson's shoulder. The dart was raised, the order was given. In the next few seconds, Jim Sterling would lose his lion, unless Samson himself chose to defy the law of man. Samson, sensing the shift in energy, stopped purring. He didn't roar. He simply looked up, his golden eyes meeting Agent Vance's. Then he rose slowly to his full, immense height. The entire room went silent. He walked to the warming bed, and with an almost human awareness, he gently placed his massive front paw directly over Liberty and Hope, shielding them from the gun. The message was clear: "You will have to go through me." Agent Vance's face, the face of law and order, cracked. She lowered her clipboard, and her eyes welled up. She remembered her own tragic failure. She saw not a beast, but a father protecting his children. "Hold your fire," she commanded, her voice thick. She looked at Jim. "Mr. Sterling, the emergency order is rescinded. I'm classifying this as a documented therapeutic cross-species bond. You have conditions, new fencing, new inspections, but I will not separate this family. I've never seen a predator choose to defend its prey from a government dart. This is bigger than a regulation." The external threat was gone, but later that night, Dr. Webb called with the truth. Samson's kidneys were failing fast. The lion who had saved the puppies was now dying himself. Jim told Martha about Samson's accelerated kidney decline. The years they thought they had with Samson, 8 to 10, were now 3 to 5. The diagnosis was a silent, internal threat that no fence could stop. But the external threat wasn't entirely gone. 3 days later, the worst blizzard of the season hit. The ranch was plunged into a white, howling darkness. Jim was in the annex checking the heat lamps when the power suddenly failed completely. The lights died. The monitors went silent. The temperature, critical for the puppies, would drop rapidly. Jim raced to the service panel. He saw the frayed, severed wires. Sabotage. Mercer had used the cover of the blizzard to cut their main backup power line. "Martha, I have to go out and fix the main line. It could take an hour," Jim yelled over the wind. "The temperature will drop to freezing here fast. Can you hold it? Go!" Martha's voice was steady. Jim was fighting the blizzard and the saboteur. But Martha was trapped alone in the freezing annex with a desperate lion and 2 puppies. Could she keep Samson calm until the lights came back on? Jim plunged into the storm. Martha was alone. She could hear Samson's breathing, heavy and ragged in the pitch darkness. The temperature inside the annex plummeted from 85 to 60 degrees in minutes. The puppies began to whimper weakly. Samson paced. He was agitated, his eyes glowing like embers in the dark. He wasn't aggressive, but the lion was struggling against his pain and the rapid temperature change. Martha knew she had to act fast, with only her voice and instinct. She found a large blanket, walked slowly toward the pacing lion, and spoke in the calm, steady voice she had used in the ER for 3 decades. "Samson, quiet boy, quiet dad. We're cold. We need your help." Samson stopped. He looked at her. Martha slowly draped the heavy blanket directly over the lion's massive back. She then gently lifted the puppies from the cold incubator and placed them on the tiled floor, right between Samson's front paws. Samson immediately lowered his head. He curled his body around the dogs, pinning the blanket over them with his chin, creating a tiny warm dome. Martha sat down beside the lion, resting her head against his immense flank, letting the heat radiate into her. She listened to his steady, deep purr, a sound now fighting the cold. When Jim returned, exhausted, the power restored, he found them all huddled together, Martha crying silent tears of relief, the lion and the puppies safe in a nest of warmth and fur. The immediate danger passed, but Martha had found something Jim missed in the turmoil, a small, fresh trail of blood leading away from the cut fence. "Jim," she whispered, "the dog mother. I don't think she died on the road. I think she crawled back here, injured, and gave birth near the fence." Mercer cut the fence knowing she might still be out there. The final crisis hit at 2 a.m. Jim checked the monitors and saw the worst sight. Hope was gone. The blizzard had shifted the fence post, creating a narrow gap, and the now mobile puppy had slipped through. The ranch was 80 acres of pitch-black, frozen wilderness. Jim knew the coyotes, the cold, and the deep snow would claim Hope within the hour. This was his worst nightmare. His failure years ago, the one that led to a lion's death, it was replaying itself. He was safe, but he was alone. Jim raced to Samson's enclosure. The lion was pacing, frantic, knowing his daughter was missing. Jim looked at the padlock. All the laws, all the permits, all the fear. They were meaningless now. He had to let his lion be a father. Jim Sterling made the only choice a desperate man could make. He opened the gate and unleashed the beast into the howling Montana night. Stay to the very end for the moment that proves love is the most powerful force on earth. Jim opened the steel gate. Samson stepped out, sniffed the air, and immediately bolted. He ran through the dark, using senses Jim couldn't fathom, navigating the deep snow where Jim stumbled. Samson led Jim across the frozen creek bed, toward the abandoned north pasture, to a cluster of dead pines. The lion stopped and began to whine, a strange, soft noise. Jim used his flashlight. Curled at the base of the largest tree, buried in snow, was Hope. She was hypothermic but alive. But that wasn't all. Tied to the tree, nearly dead from blood loss, was the mother dog. She hadn't died on the road. She had crawled back to her birthplace, given birth, and was waiting to die. She had been the only one protecting Hope until the fence was cut. Jim fell to his knees. He freed the mother and Hope, cradling them both. He looked at Samson, standing over them like a sentinel. The lion lowered his massive head and gently licked the mother dog's ear, a recognition of her fight. In that moment, Jim didn't just save his family, he saved himself. He realized the truth. The failure from years ago wasn't his fault, and he hadn't kept Samson safe. He had kept Samson isolated. Now the lion had taught him what real freedom was, the freedom to love and the freedom to risk everything for it. Jim collapsed against Samson's flank and wept. Wept for the mother dog, for the puppies, for the inevitable end of his lion, and for the release of 12 years of guilt. Samson stood over him until the crying stopped, finally allowing his human to be vulnerable. Jim and Martha managed the mother dog's recovery. She was a beautiful, grizzled Siberian Husky, whom they named Grace. Samson immediately accepted Grace into the fold. Liberty and Hope, now thriving, grew up climbing on their lion father's back, a sight that still made Jim and Martha gasp. The final inspection came 6 months later. Agent Vance returned, but this time she brought her daughter. They watched Samson, Grace, Hope, and Liberty all curled together in the sun, a perfect, impossible family. "I filed the paperwork," Vance said quietly. "Samson has given us the template for a new classification, the sanctuary bond. It acknowledges that love, not regulations, is the true fence." Jim looked at his lion, his wife, and his impossible family. He knew Samson's time was limited, but he also knew every day was a gift. The one who most needed saving was not the one who seemed most fragile. It was the man who had forgotten how to trust. As the sun set, Jim knelt beside Samson. He leaned forward and pressed his forehead against the lion's forehead, the same ritual Samson had given him. He whispered, "Thank you, Dad." Samson closed his golden eyes and the sound of his deep, steady purr rumble filled the quiet Montana air. If this extraordinary story of hope and redemption touched your heart, please let us know in the comments. And make sure to subscribe to Jim and Martha's Sanctuary channel and hit that notification bell. We have more incredible stories of unlikely bonds waiting for you right here.